Thank you, thank you, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I will say that I take my hat off to you guys. It's very powerful what I've heard. I was on earlier, and just to apologize, I was the person that that I didn't have my my sound on mute. So thank you again for everyone doing their service. And I'm a little nervous. You know, I have a few buddies that are on, just so that I don't go off script. You know, I'll start off by saying my sober date is May 16th, 1989, and when I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous, I must say that that it was a little unusual, because I had been a homeless man for, I'd say, 10 years, and I'm very lucky. There are moments where I stop in my days and I realize that how lucky I am to actually be here. And then I have a buddy, his name is Mitch, and he's here, and I'm extremely grateful for people like him, people that were here before myself, you know. So when I walked into AA, I was first of all, I didn't really walk into because I wanted to get sober. I just wanted to get off the streets for a few, and then go back to what I was doing. And through God's grace, only through God's grace, I was touched, and the hand of of AA, it wouldn't let me go back out, you know. And the reason why I say that is I've heard a lot of people speak, you know, in my 31 years, and I used to be extremely ashamed of the conditions of which I came into Alcoholics Anonymous. And I realize now, through practicing and cultivating some kind of spiritual presence in my life, that even then I was being trained, you know, to have some sort of humility, because, you know, it was devastating, the conditions of how I let myself go. But I also believe that it was necessary that I suffered through those conditions, you know. It was, you know, and I'll just give you a little quick example of what I'm talking about. You know, I was living. I heard someone earlier talking about living on the Lower East Side in an abandoned building. That was this. You know, I think that was the first speaker, and I was very intrigued, because I'm also from Brooklyn, and I'll tell you the last 3 months of me using. As I said, I was panhandling, and every day was the same. There were no difference between Monday in the summertime or Monday in January. There was no difference, you know. And at that point, I was living in this abandoned building on Avenue D. And one of the spots that I would go to was on Houston Street. It's a very famous sandwich, eatery. And it's funny because my son, he likes to go there now, And I would stand in front of that place, and people would give me coins, and it was, and you can see some people would look at me with this utter disgust, and it would hit me, and it would hit me so hard that there were times where I would just turn my head and I would cry. And so this one woman one day, she says to me, I'm not going to give you any money, but I'm going to take you down the block, and I'm going to buy some dog food for your 2 animals that you had. And I said, okay. And I walked with this woman, and I waited outside the store. She came out, she gave me the bag of dog food. I went back to the abandoned building, and I proceeded to feed one animal a portion. And then I proceeded to feed, the other animal a portion, and it for the first time in my using, I literally cried out for God. I cried. I said, "Oh God, please help me, please." And the third portion that I poured was for myself. Okay, and I ate some of that kibble with these dogs. The good thing is I realized today that there is there's a lot of protein in that stuff. So it's okay. It's okay, because after I got sober, I actually bought a bunch of show dogs and traveled around the world with them and with my kids, and all over Europe and just throughout the U.S. and stuff. So it was really good, But that anyway. So getting back to that moment, so I cried out for God, and I went back. I left the animals in that building. I went back to that same location, and I was able to get up money again. But this time I went and I bought a bottle of some cheap wine. It had no grapes. It was just sugar and whatever else they concoct that stuff with, and I drank. And the minute that bottle hit my lips, the minute that it hit my lips, I was okay. I was really okay. It was like I was living on Fifth Avenue. So alcoholism had taken absolutely everything from me. I mean, everything. And so when I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous, it was over. It was over. And I would be in AA meetings, and I would scream and yell, and they would say to me, "Prentiss, it's okay. It's okay." And someone would give me a slice, would go out and get me a slice of pizza, and they would feed me. And I would literally be in an AA meeting from 8 o'clock in the morning until midnight. And there's a saying, and where I come, in the meetings where I come from, is your first year, you're in the hands of God. Your second year, you're in the hands of the fellowship. And I truly believe that, because as crazy as it may seem, I was in no physical condition that someone would embrace me. And I can tell you that there were people that did. And at that point in my life, I would not have even embraced myself. You know, I have a sponsor, and he's always yelling at me. He says, "Prentiss, once a year you should go to the bank and take out $1,000, and just have the teller give it to you in $5 bills. And every time you're walking around the streets and someone asks you for $1 or a quarter, just give them a $5 bill. Because as much begging and as much as we had to give you, there's no possible way that you should ever refuse anyone from he says you can afford it now, so give. And it's funny because the other day my sponsor said that to me, and I said, well, it's the pandemic, and I don't want too many homeless people coming next to me. He says, but my friend, he says, you what are you talking about? You just set it on the car, or and I said, no, I'm not going to do that. But at the same time, I mean, and just being and kidding around, I do it. So I'm going to go back and just tell you a little bit more about me. I grew up in Brooklyn. I was the youngest of 6 kids. I never met my dad. I live with my grandparents, and my grandparents really loved me. I mean, I mean, I was their favorite grandchild, And then eventually my mom came, because she had to get away from her husband, who's my father. And the year that she came, I was like 6 years old, 7 years old. And what happened was that, you're in kindergarten, you go to school, and at the end of the school year, you look forward to being out in the summer, the summer, and playing in the grass and going to the beach or Coney Island or whatever. In my case, it was very different. I lost all my parents that one summer. I was 7, 8 years old. I mean, I lost everybody. Just, from the beginning of the summer until September arrived. I lost my mother, lost my grandfather, lost my grandmother, and it was devastating. I mean, it was devastating, and I think I built up this, this belief that I was not worthy, that God didn't think that I was worthy enough, and I walked this earth for a long time with this kind of shame, and just utter loneliness. I mean, I was just lonely, And so I was adopted by my aunt and uncle. So I moved with them. And from the age of 8, from the age of 8 years old, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, my uncle he had problems with drugs, and but not, I don't know, with drugs, but with alcohol. And well, basically he abused me, He physically abused me. There were times when I would come home from school, and he would almost knock my teeth out. And it was so compound that with losing all my parents. By the age of 14 years old, I left, never to return. And what does a 14-year-old do? I'm in the streets of New York City. I'm a 14-year-old trying to make adult decisions, and this never worked out. So what do you do to survive that? I started to drink, and there are drugs in my story, but I'll stick to alcohol because that's my primary. So anyway, I went to the streets. I went on the streets of New York City, I wasn't able to go to school, and because I had to find ways to survive, and it was. I mean, there were days. I mean, I remember being just walking around when, as I said, there were times when there were Christmas or Thanksgiving or Easter or there was no difference in the days for me, and I had this enormous amount of distrust and hatred towards the idea of a God concept. Because how could God do something like that to a little boy like me? It wasn't fair. And so through my practice, and I travel all over around the world, and I go to different places, Japan, and I'm very deeply involved in meditation and in my spiritual practice. I'm very dedicated to it. Which there are times I'm shocked that I have this much, and I'm also very dedicated to Alcoholics Anonymous. I go to meetings at least 4 or 5 days a week, and now that we're on Zoom, it's every day, sometimes 3, 4, 5 times a day. So what happened was that I started to use drugs and alcohol, as I said, and then I went into a drug program when I was like 16 years old, but it didn't work. I mean, as soon as they were, I was allowed to get drinking privileges. All I did was take alcohol and pour on all the isms and all the low self-esteem. It was like pouring on alcohol on weed. The more alcohol I poured on it, the more the weed would grow. And so anyway, I went into a drug program. I wasn't, I didn't have any academic skills, so they said, Prentiss, we'll let you do some printing, like we'll send you to printing school. And it wasn't very glamorous. All my friends were going to Brooklyn College, Vassar, and yada yada yada, and I was going to some crappy printing school, and so but I completed it, and I had these skills. And it's funny because when I got sober, I ended up owning a printing company. And anyway, so what happened was that there were when I left that program, I started to drink and do things again, and I worked in printing a little bit. But then again, as I'm pouring alcohol on these impurities, I call them, that I have, things just got worse. The more I drank, things would get bad. So anyway, in the early 70s, mid 70s, I ended up being very successful doing some things, and I had a clothing store and in the East Village, and I owned a club on 20th Street, 20th and 5th Avenue, and now you get a guy coming from public housing who's made it to that point. I was able to celebrate. I owned a club. I had all these people coming. I mean, there are people. There are musical legends. There are actors, and it was a very live. It was a very cool time for me. So little did I know, and I didn't know too much about alcoholism. I really didn't. I mean, I knew that I had other problems, but I didn't know that alcohol was one of my problems, And so what happened was that I have a cousin who was also she was a model, and she introduced me to some things, and I started to do this. And this is at that point is when I that's when I actually I got to a point where things went really out of control. My drinking, I can tell you, my drinking took me to places that I just never ever thought it was possible. The more I drank, the bottom, every bottom had another bottom, and then there was another. I mean, it was unbelievable. I've had the top part of my left ear bitten off. I was in a coma. I was in a coma for about 3 weeks. I was in a coma. I got hit by a car. And then it's funny because in the big book they talk about the alcoholic that jaywalks, and there's Prentiss. I was riding my bike down St. Mark's Place in the East Village, and got hit by a car. Car hits me. I'm in Cabrini. I'm in Bellevue Hospital for 3 weeks in a coma. People didn't know what was, they didn't know what was going to happen. And I come out of the coma. They had to take me straight into surgery. And lo and behold, my alcoholism, as soon as I was released from that hospital, and I went home, and I had a cast on from my waist down to my ankles, and I had to, it was a very trying time. The doctor said that they didn't know if I would be able to use my left leg again. And today I use it. I mean, I walk everywhere. But anyway, I never completed therapy, physical therapy for that. I have a permanent stiffness in my left leg. And that whole time I was drinking Southern Comfort. It was off the hook. I mean, I was drinking and drinking, and you would have thought that, hey, I would reflect on what's going on. I would try to take care of myself, and that wasn't the case, and so that was the second time I was in the hospital. Then the last time that I was in the hospital, which is, I'll catch up to date because I know I'm going all over the place, and I don't, I want to try and make sense. So when I was telling you that after I was in that abandoned building, I went back to Cats, and I was able to get food, and I got myself something to drink. I was walking down the street with this bottle of this alcohol, and I got to the corner of 6th Street and Avenue A, and I'm in the middle of the street, and I'm dancing like a wild, like a wild man. I'm just dancing in the middle of the street, and these kids, they said to me, "Get out of the middle of the street, you dirty bum." And in my alcoholic way, I was like, "Do you know who you're talking to? Are you crazy? I used to own a club on 5th Avenue and 20th Street. I used to own a store, and I used to have all these celebrities, and yada yada." And I took the wine bottle, and I with profanity, and I said, "You," and I threw the wine bottle in the car, at the car, and it hit the window, and it bust. And these three kids got out of that car, and they chased me for 1 block. I couldn't run fast, and I couldn't run far, and they commenced to beat me. They beat me so bad they broke my shoulder. I had a fractured jaw. I ended up in Cabrini Hospital. I had sling, my leg up in the air, and here another hospital visit. That time I stayed there, I think, for 4.5 weeks. Now, just if you can close your eyes for a moment, just imagine I was a homeless guy. I hadn't washed my body, and I haven't washed in at least 10 years. When I did, in the summertime, what we would do is I would wash with the fire hydrant. In the wintertime, you're not going to use the fire hydrant because it's too cold. So you can imagine the condition that I was in when I ended up in Cabrini Hospital. And so anyway, eventually they had to put me out of Cabrini Hospital. I came out, I had slippers, hospital slippers, hospital robe, and the whole thing. And I got on the train. I took the F train to Queens, and I went to my sister's house, and she let me in, and she looked at me. She said, "Oh my God." She said, "Where have you been? We've been looking for you." And I said to her, I says, "I don't know if I can make it this time." And I will say to you that I really thought that it was over. I really thought that that was the end. It was harder to live. It was really difficult to live day to day with just trying to find something to put in. Every now and then I put some food, but 90% of the time it was something to drink or something, just to take off the shakes and stuff. And and I remember, because I used to walk up and down the streets in East Village, and I would look at my reflection in the store window, and I would talk to myself, and I would answer back. I still talk to myself. I just don't answer back anymore. I don't answer my own conversations anymore. But it's so, and I think that comes with getting a little bit of age, So anyway, my sister, she bought a house in Mel Basin in Brooklyn, and she says, well, to keep you busy, just go stay there. She got a mattress and a refrigerator, put some stuff in there. And she had contractors working on the place, and I was supposed to oversee the contractors, and that wasn't the case. I ended up chasing these guys away. It was just I was pathetic, and I didn't stop drinking. And my sister gave me her credit. On top of that, she gave me her credit card and the keys to her brand new Mitsubishi Galant. Lo and behold, after a month of me staying there, I ended up driving that Mitsubishi Galant back to the Lower East Side, to the same location, with the sling, drive, and I ended up totaling her car. And I stayed out for about 4 days with the car. I mean, it was a mess. And I ended up driving it back to Brooklyn. It had no headlights, and it was a brand new vehicle. It had no headlights, and it was just a mess. I mean, it was really, really a mess. And I went back upstairs, and I laid down on that mattress, and my sister and everybody came over, and my aunts and uncles, and they said, "We can't help you. You gotta leave. You gotta leave." And that's when I ended up going back to the East Village, and I walked to this place called Living Now on St. Mark's Place, and that's when my journey really started. It really, I can't say enough about how this place worked, because there were a lot of people there like myself, it was, a lot of guys were homeless. They were on different kind of programs, but they weren't drinking. They were not drinking. And my brother-in-law put me in, and he says, "I'm going to get you a hotel room so you'll be okay. You can at least take a shower." And he put me in this place called the Sunshine Hotel, which is on the Bowery. And I can tell you that there's no sunshine anywhere. I have no idea why they would even call it the Sunshine Hotel. But it was like a flop house, and it was just a little cubicle. It had the barbed wires and a mattress sitting on some crates, and a place to shower, and that's where my journey started. I mean, that's really where it started. I would meet my brother-in-law, and at his job, he worked for the telephone company. I would meet him at lunchtime. He'd buy me a pack of cigarettes, and he would outline all the meetings he would want me to go to. And I would go. Most of the meetings that I would go to were meetings where they had snacks. If they didn't have snacks, I was not going to go to that meeting, you know. And so between Living Now, the Manhattan Group, the 14th Street Workshop, and the Soho Group is where I just and then when I got a little more to when I got a few more months, my friends, they said, well, let's go over to the Midnight Group in the West Village. And by that point, you know, people gave me shirt, you know, to wear. And anyway, you know, to speed this up a little bit, I was never homeless again. I never slept. I never slept outside. You know, I've always had a roof over my head. I stayed with one friend, with another friend. Someone else took me in, and that's exactly how it worked. You know, and my first year, no, after I think like 17 months, there was an advertising in the New York Times, and I went to, you know, I answered in, you know, an ad, and it was working with Smith Barney, and you know, you have to pass drug tests. It's you know, it's a brokerage, and I was like, wow. I said to my sponsor, I said, you know, you think I can pass it? He said, well, you haven't had drugs or alcohol, Prentiss, in 18 months. You know, try it. I went, and lo and behold, I ended up getting the job. I got the job. So I went from sleeping in Tompkins Square Park, the Sunshine Hotel, to having a job working at Smith Barney. I mean, literally, Smith Barney, my first sober job. I worked there for like 2.5, 3 years. And for some reason, I thought that I could do better, and I left. I left that company, and I ended up opening up a printing company. And I opened up this printing company in the worst financial times in the 90s. In 1994, all the printing companies were closing down because of the computers came about, and all my friends were like, how are you going to make it? I said, I'll do it. And to be honest with you, you know, from that point on, my idea of God kept changing. It kept changing. Now, as I told you, what happened to me, my loss, and my, you know, the idea that I would believe in God, the concept of God, you know, I didn't think it was possible. In fact, I would sit in AA meetings at times, and when people would read from the big book and talk about God, this woman, her name is Louise, and she's sober about 50-something years now. She was qualifying at the 12th Street Workshop. And she was talking, and they were reading, and they were talking about God. And I got up in the middle of that meeting, and I jumped up in my crazy rage, and I told her I would spit at her, and I would throw that book at you. And everybody from the meeting, they picked me up, brought me to the back of the room, get some coffee, eat some cookies, Prentiss, and you're going to be okay. People never threw me out. In fact, this past Christmas, I was at someone's Christmas party, and they said, and I said, Prentiss, I can't believe it's you. I haven't seen you in 25 something years. She says, boy, you were scary back then, you know. And the truth is that today you wouldn't be able to perform like that in AA, because you would get, if you carried on that way, they would put you out of AA. And so I got sober exactly when it was time for me to get sober. You know, I mean, they let me scream, yell, curse people out. I would interrupt the meetings, and on and on and on and on. So anyway, I opened up this printing company, and things got really good for me. I mean, things got really, really good. There was a woman in AA. Her name was Marilyn. And I like to tell this story. Her name is Marilyn. And Marilyn was from the Upper East Side, extremely different completely different backgrounds. And Marilyn used to hand me dollars when I would ride on the 6 train because she lived on the Upper East Side. And I met her in AA. And she said to me, she says, you know, you don't remember me, but I would give you money on the train. Marilyn and I became very, very tight. I mean, we became, you know, she didn't have brothers and sisters. She was an only child. She worked really hard. She was a very, very extremely wealthy woman. And for some reason, her and I, we clicked together. And she would say to me, Prentiss, what are you doing this week? How are you getting business? And she, it was like she was my mother. You know, like she was like the mother that I never had, you know, and one thing would lead to another. She would tell me how, you know, how I need to go after business and go after that and go after this. And I became, you know, I ended up getting a lot of really major accounts with this printing company. And that is how, to get to the next chapter of this whole sobriety, is that I ended up meeting a French woman, getting married in AA, and had children. I have a 20-year-old son who's in school in Pittsburgh, and I have a daughter who's getting ready to go to college in Boston. And it's funny because my son, when he comes to New York City, him and his friends most of his friends are international students, and for some reason they always want me to meet them at Katz. Now Katz is the place where I used to panhandle, you know. So my son says, Dad, meet us at Katz. I know, you know, I'm just hanging out with my friends. I know that you don't eat meat, so just meet us there, and you know, you can have some French fries or something. I said, okay, I'll meet you guys there. And he says, have you ever been here before? And I was like, yeah, I you know, many years ago I came. So anyway, my son, who is just this adorable guy. I mean, he's a joy to be around, you know. And he says to me, Dad, I didn't know you used to have problems with drugs and alcohol. He said, really? He says, like, well, you have a couple of beers and you fell off the bar stool or something? He says, he says, really, tell me about it. And I said, well, I'll just tell you a little bit about it. I said, yeah, I used to drink and drug, you know, and he went and told his sister. He said, you know, Dad used to have problems with drugs and alcohol. And his sister looked at him and said, Andre, are you crazy? What are you talking about? Where would you get something like that? And so everything that I have told you up until this point in my sobriety, there's really no reflection in my immediate day-to-day life that would say to you that I lived that kind of past. You know, I have a business today. Me and my buddies, we buy and sell buildings mainly in Brooklyn, and it's been good. It's really been good. It's been challenging. My you know, there are times when my self-worth will still get in my way, but what I've been able to incorporate, and I think it's extremely important that because it tells us all throughout the literature that we get sober and we go back to our communities and to become these useful human beings, and that you should get some kind of spiritual practice, you know. And so what I've done is I've gotten very, very deeply involved in meditation, and so this meditation practice has taken me, like a year and a half ago, I was in Japan on literally one of the highest points in Japan with a bunch of other people that was on this mission of seeking this ability to have possession of ourselves, you know. And I looked around. I said, you know, there were like 45. Well, most of them were monks, but I looked around. I said, I wonder how many people here are in the program. I'm the only African American here. There is, yeah, I'm the only one that speaks English, you know. But and at that point, I realized that AA has done for me, has turned around my life to the point where it's very, you know, when I get to these places, and I will say, you know, I've been through divorce, you know, and that's a whole nother story. My guys like my buddy Mitch, who I can't, you know, we come into AA and you really never know who it is that you're going to connect with. And the one thing that I realize is that we you know, that we all have these different backgrounds. So it's like, and it's like a human library, you know. We've come in different ways, but there's a lot of, I mean, we have something that's very in common, and it's that. And what for me, what's very common is that I think even way before I even realized that I had some kind of spiritual disease, you know, that I was seeking this practice of what AA has afforded me. You know, my soul has been looking for this, and you know, as I say to my, you know, say to all of my friends, you know, I made the wrong turn and I ended up in the right place, you know. And not often does that happen, you know. And the reason why the reason why I'll tell you why I say that is, you know, I sell properties, you know, and it's mainly, I sell houses, you know, and I take abandoned buildings, we refurbish them, we sell them on the market. And one day this owner of this building, I was getting ready to close this deal, and my partner's like, we're in this abandoned building. My partner's like, Prentiss, someone's living in this thing. I said, yeah. I understand it. He says, can you believe that someone's living in it? He says, how does someone live here? So him and I and Itai and Oren, we went to a diner, and we started having something to eat, and I proceeded to tell my partners everything that I've told you this evening, this afternoon, that I told them my whole story. And they looked at me and they said, come on, man, Prentiss, you're just trying to get more money out of us. You know, come on, be honest with us. You never lived in an abandoned building. You won't even smoke a cigarette, Prentiss. So how does, you know, and anyway, so as I said, my life today doesn't reflect anything of my past, you know, and I think that is the journey of everyone that comes into Alcoholics Anonymous, is you know, there's a place called, there's a meeting called New Life, and I can testify that I have a new life. You know, I'm sitting in an apartment right now that's up in Harlem that I bought for my son when he graduates college. I'm going to give him this as his graduation present, you know. And so anyway, that building that my buddies and I were in, the owner of that property was was supposed to show up at the location, because I had contractors and everybody in there, and she was all the way on the other side of Brooklyn, and I was like, "What are you doing down there? You're supposed to be at the location." And she made me drive. If you know Brooklyn, Brooklyn's pretty large. I had to drive from one part of the Brooklyn to the other end of Brooklyn, and when I got to the block and the location where she was, to retrieve these keys from her, she was in a church, and that church that she was in was the same church. When I walked in there, she was on the 3rd floor, and I took the elevator up to the 3rd floor, and it's the same room where my parents had their funeral. And it blew my mind. It literally, it really shook me. That when I opened the door and I walked into that room, there she was to give me the keys to unlock all that I have been through. For the last 40, 50 years, I was so angry towards this higher power, towards this idea that I was walking alone, And I met these people along the way, people like Mitch, like my friend Marilyn, Steve. I met these individuals, and my partners called me while I was in that place where my parents' funeral were, because I hadn't been in there since I was 7 or 8 years old, and I cried for 45 minutes. For 45 minutes, I cried, and my partner said, "Where are you? You need to get back here." And I said, "You got to give me a half hour or so." And I've had so many experiences like that. When my first sober job at Smith Barney, when I got the job, I filled out the application. They asked on the application, you have to write down the last 5 or 6 different places you've lived. And I had to put down all these false addresses. I put down on East, I put down this address and that address. I was homeless for 10 years. For 10 years, I hadn't washed my body. Let alone that you want an address. So anyway, my finger went. I worked there after like 5 months. My fingerprints came back from Washington, D.C. And the VP of my department calls me in, and he says to me, "Prentiss, your fingerprints has been returned. We really like you. We really like your work." And he was a born again Christian. And he says, and I sat down and I told him my story as I'm telling you, my drinking, my other substances. And he says, "Well, I'm a born again Christian and I'm an alcoholic." And I said, praise the Lord. And he says, "I'm going to do everything I can do that you can keep this job." So there's been time after time after time after time that for my God knows that He needs to show me. I'm going to believe you got to show me. I mean, you got to put the evidence right in front of me. And so that has happened. That has happened repeatedly, over and over and over. I mean, the idea that I was able to walk into Alcoholics Anonymous and not ever be homeless again. The idea that I have friends who care more about me than I care about myself. That woman Marilyn that I told you about, who became like a godmother to me. At the end of her death, At the end of her death, I mean, her life rather, she was dying, and she was in MIU hospital, and she would not let any of her very wealthy East Hampton, Connecticut friends. She said, she told her husband, the only person that I want you to let come is Prentiss. Don't let anyone else come. I just want to see him. And Marilyn, when I owned this printing company, I'd be sitting in my office, and Marilyn would say, Prentiss, what are you doing today? What account are you going after? What are you doing? What are you doing? Who are you dating? Who are you going out with? And she said, I'm going to tell you a story. She says, Prentiss, reach for the sky. It's an old Jewish saying. Reach for the sky. If you land on the roof, you'll still be on top. I know today because I have a ton of very, very religious Jewish friends, and that's not a Jewish saying, not at all. And so I've been carried this whole time. I have been carried day by day by day by day. So when the pandemic happened, and this whole thing started, God has been preparing me for this moment all my life. My entire life, I've been preparing. And I can say to you now that it's a very special time in history. It's a spiritual history for me. It's a very special time that my sponsor said to me, Prentiss, it's a moment where you are required to get possession of yourself now. You know, there's really no excuse to really, you know, you're going to sit with yourself, you know, and because I always thought that if I had this, I would feel this way. If I had that, I would feel this way. If I had mother and father, I would feel that, you know, things would work out that way. If my uncle didn't abuse me. But I can tell you, I can say this to you, that I wouldn't change my story for nothing in the world. My deepest and my most suffering times, the most that I've suffered, is it has trained me to be a humble human being, to stay humble, you know. So I still, by myself, I eat the same way I did when I was. I mean, I love peanut butter and jelly. I'll go fix a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I'm not extravagant, you know. My son and daughter, they like things, you know. I'm here to try to provide for them so that I don't have to become their story. You know, I've traveled all around the world with my kids. You know, they speak different languages. They've had a completely different experience. They've never spent a summer in the United States up in, you know, the first 12 years, 13 years of their life, you know, until they became teenagers and they wanted to be here. But they've always spent their summers abroad. You know, I've had an extraordinary life. You know, I've been, you know, when I was in Japan with these monks, after we sat on it, we hung out on this mountain for like 9 days. I had to actually come, and I spoke in front of 4,500 people in Japan. And I'm not one to want to speak at meetings. I prefer to do one-on-one talk with you. You know, I have just, you know, like most people that are in AA who I know, they know my story. There's nothing that I have to hide from them. I don't have to feel. So, but I'm not very big at qualifying at meetings. If when I'm asked, I will do it. I will never ever refuse. Because AA has given me, has done for me things that I didn't think was possible. I just didn't think that it was possible that I could, the idea that some woman would even marry me, and have children was far-fetched. I remember when I first got sober. For the first 8-9 years, I was a single person, because I was trying to get these things that I thought that I really thought that would fix it. And I remember when I had about 6 years,
です。ジャズピアノが
I was
結び
still
つける
feeling
ニ
the
ューヨー
same
クと
way
東京。
as
そ
I
の
was
熱く
when
爽
I
やかな
was
日曜日の朝は、
when I was out there in the streets. I felt the same way. And my sponsor says, Prentiss, you're going to have to really, a guy like you're going to have to do a lot of work. And that was, and that from that time on, I've always seeked outside spiritual practices, and to merge them with AA. I mean, I think I don't think there's I don't think there's anything quite like AA. I really don't. I really don't. I don't believe that there's anything that even comes close to it. But even when I was going through divorce about 7 years ago, it was a very trying time. I mean, it was horrific. My wife is French, and she's very well known in the French and fashion world, and I went to court. I had a little 2'2". No, maybe he's a little tall. He's maybe 3 feet. He's like 3'3", and my wife came with all these attorneys from this big company, and my buddy from AA, he says, Prentiss, it's going to be okay. It's going to work out. Well, I can tell you it worked. It did work out. I lost my parental rights. I lost everything. I mean, I literally lost everything. It was crazy. And that was in AA, being sober. That was in AA, being sober. I think I was sober 21, 22 years. But even that, I wouldn't change it for anything in the world. I mean, again, my suffering has made me the individual that I am, and I don't have a lot more to say, and I will say to you that I have never spoken for this long. This is a really, really long time, and you guys have been doing this all day. That is, there's a thing. I'll stop with this here. When you're in the hood, and you're like you're with a bunch of buddies, and the gym, and there's a saying that the guy, you say to your buddy, yo, what's up? And he says to you, it's all good. And it's in that God vibration where we come into Alcoholics Anonymous with a condition, and we work 1 through 12, and we get to say it's all good now. I really don't have any reason to go drink. I have no reasons to drink. And in the spiritual world in Asia, the word yo means to offer, to give. And so with that, I say to you guys, thank you for my sobriety. And I don't often say that I hope I help someone, because it's not my responsibility. If you have not had a spiritual experience, then that's on you, because whenever I walk into an AA meeting, I've had a spiritual experience. To watch people transform from one thing to turn out to a different individual is only God can do this. So with that, I want to thank you guys, and again, thank you for letting me share my my experience.
That was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Prentiss.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lou. Thank you.
You.
Thank you, Prentiss.
Thanks, Prentiss.
Thank you.
You know I love you, Prentiss.
Hey, that's my buddy.
Thanks, Prentiss.
Thanks,
Right.
Rich.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Bless. Thank you, Jim.
Prentiss, I'll talk to you later.
Okay, bud.
Jim and Genevieve, it was
Prentiss.
great. It was great. Thank you.
Jen.
Thank you, Prentiss. Wonderful, wonderful story.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Prentiss.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Oh.
thank you.
Thank you, Prentiss.